Hey there, this is Natalie, and in this video I want to talk about a subject I don't usually dig into too much, which is the actual animation in the ReZero anime series. I usually stick to talking about what I know, and I'm a writer and not in any way an animation expert, so I generally keep my more detailed analysis to things like the story and characters, and what I think author Tappei Nagatsuki might do with it all later in the series. But while I've been branching out into covering Attack on Titan as well as ReZero in the last month or so, I found myself discussing the animation in that show a fair amount, due to Attack on Titan having moved studios for the final season from WIT to MAPPA, and a lot of people having things to say about changes that have been made in the visual presentation of the show as part of Studio MAPPA's take on it. I've found it really interesting to look deeper into the animation side of things, which had always been kind of a black box to me before, and so I decided to do some research on ReZero's animation too, to look for answers to two questions I know a lot of people have had about ReZero Season 2. Firstly, why doesn't it look as good as Season 1? And secondly, will the second cour address those things and look better than the first? ReZero Season 2 Part 2 will start airing in under a week on January 6th, so it won't be long until we can make up our own minds about it. And I will of course be giving lots of coverage to the new episodes as they air, so please consider subscribing to my channel and ringing the bell to be notified when I upload new ReZero content. Doing all the YouTubey things like subscribing, liking the video, and talking to me in the comments really helps me out, so please do if you enjoy this kind of content. Now, a lot of the information I will be talking about in this video came from a really in-depth article about ReZero Season 2's production on a website called Sakuga Brazil, which I'll link to in the description if you want to go deeper into the topic. It's a really good Sakuga blog, Sakuga being the Japanese term for the kind of flagship animation moments used in anime. And there are articles like this one in English as well as Portuguese, written by people who really follow the animators and animation directors working on shows like ReZero and who know their stuff when it comes to that extremely important aspect of what makes anime what it is. Brazil, incidentally, has one of the strongest anime fan communities outside of Asia, and stuff coming from Brazilian sites and creators tends to be well worth paying attention to. So big shout out to Sakuga Brazil, and definitely check it out if you haven't already. So first, let's talk about the three main things that were working against White Fox, the studio behind ReZero, when it came to making Season 2 look the same as Season 1. Then I want to talk about the way these challenges actually manifested themselves in the 13 episodes we've had so far, both in terms of the way Season 2 looked inferior to Season 1, and the ways that White Fox used stylistic measures and approaches to keep as much of the impact of the season as possible. Because I do think it's important to consider how the talents of the team involved did manage to make a production that was, starting with these challenges, still hit a good deal of the important moments in the source material in a way that had the right impact. Then, finally, I'll talk about what all of this is likely to mean for Cour 2. When it comes to the three main problems White Fox had in making the much anticipated Season 2 of ReZero, you can almost certainly guess what one of them was. The measures put in place in terms of things like social distancing at the point in 2020 when they were still expecting to release Season 2 in the spring anime season made that impossible, where a lot of the painting for the show was outsourced to a studio in China. I don't think it's really necessary to go into why getting work done in China at that time was far from easy. This contributed to the season being delayed, along with the fact that Nobuhiko Okamoto, the voice actor for Garfield, who's also known for playing Accelerator in the Index series and Bakugo in My Hero Academia, needed to have throat surgery. Delays like this were a thing on a very high percentage of anime series in 2020, which is why the winter 2021 season is so incredibly stacked with high-profile shows that were delayed. But while the delays were necessary for a lot of shows to be made at all, simply having a longer deadline doesn't take away all of the challenges people working on anime were having, or mean that the productions would ultimately end up being as good as they would have been had the 2020 situation never happened. You can even see hints of the effects of the difficulties people working on anime have had in things like the fact the new season of Attack on Titan doesn't have the same sort of orchestral soundtrack as it likely would have done if recording an orchestra's worth of people at the same time was still reliably an option. But even without the many challenges of making anime in 2020, White Fox had a couple of other reasons why their second season of Re:Zero looked different and, to most people's minds, inferior to season 1. Primarily, they just didn't have the same people to work on it. With a 4-year gap between seasons and the fact that White Fox, like just about every other studio, relies a lot on freelancers, it wasn't possible to secure the same directors and key animators who worked on season 1. Some notable people like Naoto Hosoda, who did the storyboards for the iconic episode 15 of season 1, as well as episode 10, which was the climax of Arc 2, and who is also known for working as the series director on The Devil is a Part-Timer, as well as a director on Mirai Nikki, didn't return for season 2. Manabu Okamoto, who was the director for some of the less action-focused, more emotional episodes, also didn't return, and has been working on the highly anticipated anime adaptation of the hugely popular light novel series Mushoku Tensei, though still for White Fox. Incidentally, I watched the first double episode of Mushoku Tensei last night, and it seems really promising so far. But honestly, the list of important people involved in making Re:Zero Season 1, the impressive production that it was, who either have left White Fox for new job opportunities in the 4-year gap between seasons, or who were working on Re:Zero as freelancers and weren't available to return, is long. And if you want to know more about the animators and directors who didn't return and what they've been working on, then there's plenty of information about that in the article I've linked to in the description. Of course, not having the exact same people working on a season doesn't have to mean a drop in perceived production quality. You may notice that the signature flair of one director or artist isn't there anymore, but that can mean there's something else special that a different talent has brought to the show in its place. But, as well as not being able to use a lot of the same people for season 2, White Fox also no longer had another studio helping them out, meaning their own team was spread a lot more thinly than for season 1. See, for production of season 1, White Fox outsourced 9 out of the 25 episodes to the then fairly newly established Studio Nexus. Nexus even had responsibility for a run of 3 consecutive episodes in the form of episodes 4, 5 and 6, which took a lot of the pressure off of White Fox. Nexus also brought a dedicated action animation director to the series, with Kazuya Nakanishi filling that role. White Fox itself didn't actually have an action animation director for the episodes it made in-house. Nexus wasn't involved in season 2 at all, where they moved on to first co-producing Chivalry of a Failed Knight with Silverlink, and then working on their own anime series, which have included Darwin's Game and Granbelm. So, with many of the key people involved in season 1 not returning, with none of the heavy support Studio Nexus provided before, and with the countless difficulties introduced by trying to make anything during a global health crisis, White Fox was staring down a huge challenge in making Re:Zero Season 2. When you also consider the complexity of the source material, which meant that many of the episodes in Core 1 at least were longer than is typical in anime, with the openings and endings rarely used, it's actually pretty impressive that the season came out looking as good as it did. White Fox did, in my opinion at least, a great job of leveraging stylistic approaches that stretched what they have to give a more impactful finished product, without straining their resources. It doesn't cost any more to time the placing of the title card or the moment when the ending song kicks in just right to get the strongest effect, but it does take talent and genuinely caring about the episode. Equally, the way certain scenes like the Kiss of Death were designed used limited animation, but an artistic approach that gave the right mood, especially when combined with great acting performances and sound design. Still, the differences can't really be missed, and while to someone like me, who is more of a words person, and will still be satisfied with a production as long as the characters don't look straight up ugly to me, the acting is good and the story still comes across well, none of them really hampered my enjoyment of the first cour. For a lot of people, they did. We all tend to have different things we care about when deciding on the quality of an anime, and where for me, the problems I had with Season 2 so far were all connected to things like an important revelation about Satella being cut out. And there were important things cut from Season 1 too, so that's not even a Season 2 specific problem. For other people, the lack of those long, close-up moments that depict the changes of emotion on a character's face in intense and fluid detail were a serious and notable drop in quality. White Fox took the approach of putting more movement into the equivalent high emotion scenes in Season 2, such as Subaru opening up to Echidna about Return by Death, to mask the fact that they just didn't have the capacity to make those kinds of shots this time around. And to be fair to them, it is a reasonable approach, relying more on the voice actors and the general mood of the scene to carry the emotion than the visual facial nuances. Most shows don't have those kinds of treatments for their more emotional scenes after all, but it's the fact that most shows don't have them that made them so impactful in ReZero Season 1, and why we noticed they were gone and felt the drop in production quality. Plot-wise, Subaru's emotional state gets taken to even greater extremes in Season 2 than in the first season, but when you think back to what they actually looked like, there weren't the same uncomfortably intimate scenes of his despair or relief being held in focus as there were in Season 1. Equally, for other characters, Echidna's long-awaited monologue trying to persuade Subaru to contract with her fell flat, because novel readers have been expecting a real performance from Echidna, akin to what we got from Rem in episode 18, with the animation of the characters making a long portion of just talking extremely engaging. Now, not only did they probably want to cut Echidna's speech down for time, they were probably also aware that the Season 2 production just couldn't handle a scene like that. Instead, Echidna isn't really animated much at all during the incredibly short alternative to the famous monologue that appeared in the anime. Incidentally, if you're curious about what Echidna's monologue was like originally, I did read out the entire web novel version, which is the longest version of all, for my episode 12 cut content video, which you can find on my channel. While I did also narrate the rest of the chapter the speech appears in and do some commentary, so it's not the whole video, it is most of the video, and that video is about 45 minutes long. It was a long speech. I think it was less than 10 seconds in the anime though I haven't actually timed it, so I could be exaggerating there. A key part of that scene is that Echidna delivers her speech passionately, but Subaru confronts her after she finishes with her offer of a contract, saying that her emotions all seem superficial and fake. To have a scene where she gives more of the speech, and to have us experience these same thoughts Subaru has about her delivery of it, would have been possible with the kind of fluid, nuanced facial animation we got in episode 18 of Season 1, but perhaps wisely, knowing the limitations they were experiencing, White Fox didn't attempt this. So that's really the story so far about why White Fox couldn't match Season 1's production, and what they did to try to keep Season 2 from suffering too much from those things. But are we likely to see a marked improvement in the second cour, where they've had longer to try and fix some of their problems, and of course the experience of making the first cour with this team to draw on? Well, the answers to that won't really be known until we actually get to see some of Cour 2, but according to Sakuga Brazil, White Fox's emphasis for the season is on consistency rather than fluidity, and so we can expect to see the same approaches taken in the quieter, more emotional scenes as we saw in the first cour. However, what White Fox does have for Season 2 is a dedicated animation action director, Kazuhiro Ota, and where he pretty much did all the heavy lifting on the most action-rich episodes in the first cour, like episode 8, which was where we saw Garfield's tiger form going berserk, he will be having a lot to do in cour 2. I'm not going to spoil anything that happens in the second cour, but I'm sure that even based on the general conventions of stories, anime-only fans can guess that the second half of ReZero's Arc 4 is going to include its climactic action scenes. And with Kazuhiro Ota giving White Fox the dedicated attention to the action sequences that this kind of material is going to really need, we should expect them to live up to expectations. So that's about all from me on this topic for now, though with Season 2 Part 2 so close, we should be able to revisit the animation as a subject once some of the more important scenes have been aired. I will be covering every episode with a general analysis after it airs, and then other episode-specific videos like cut content and explanations and so on between episodes, depending on what's most interesting to talk about with each one. Plus, I will be covering Arc 7 of the ReZero web novel, which could start coming out at any time. So if you're a ReZero fan and haven't already, please subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos come out. I'll also be continuing my Attack on Titan coverage throughout the season, plus doing weekly episode reviews on 2 other series, which will be Log Horizon and World Trigger, because I'm so excited to see those 2 coming back, and in a season as stacked as Winter 2021, I feel like they might not get as much coverage as they deserve, so I want to give them some love. Once again, Happy New Year, and I hope to see you all again very soon.